Yeah, we're pretty fucked. Well, here's one piece of good news for the planet, I think, that when this way of life collapses, there will never be another blowout like this because the easily accessible reserves of various minerals are gone.
Hey there, fellow planet rebels. Welcome back to Are We Fucked? How to Survive a Climate Shit Show. I'm your host, Lisa Camillo, anthropologist, filmmaker, and your fearless leader in the fight against the forces of destruction. Oh boy, do we have a rebel with a cause for you today. Joining us is none other than Derrick Jensen, the American ecophilosopher, radical environmentalist, and all-around badass. And apparently, he's really into salmon. Now, if you thought you knew everything there was to know about civilization and its dark underbelly, think again. Derrick's writing dives deep into the heart of the beast, exposing its inherent values, hidden promises, and links to oppression and ecological abuse. He basically hates civilization as much as I do, so I'm sure we'll definitely get along. But Derrick's not just here to critique. Oh no, he's on a mission to shake things up and challenge the status quo. From advocating for ecocentrism to promoting the dismantling of industrial civilization by any means necessary. Derrick's ideas are as radical as they are revolutionary. So grab your protest signs and get ready to join the resistance. Derrick Jensen is here to blow your mind and inspire you to take action like never before. Hi, Derrick. I'm so excited to have you here. You have incredible theories, actually. So first of all, I want to ask you the question I ask everyone. Are we fucked?
Yes. I wrote an essay 15, 20 years ago in which the first sentence was, the most common words I ever hear spoken by any environmentalists are, we're fucked. And things have just gotten worse since then. So yeah, we're pretty fucked.
Yeah, that's great. That's just going to increase my anxiety I already have. But you talk about ecocide, which I think it's a very fascinating word.
Yeah, I mean, the only hesitation I would have on we're fucked is that wild nature is even more fucked than we are. And every biological indicator is going the wrong direction. I sometimes think that if you could go back in time 10,000 years ago and you said to a person, okay, I'm going to give you some things that humans are going to do in the next 10,000 years, and you tell me which one you disbelieve the most, which is the biggest lie. One of them is somebody flies to the moon. One of them is that somebody is able to be on one side of the planet and then the same day be on the other side of the planet, or that will effectively wipe out all the fish in the oceans. And I think they would say, the one I don't believe is the one about the oceans, because that is an extraordinary accomplishment, how much we have. I don't know if you've read accounts of like early Europeans coming to North America, and the banks of cod would be so thick that they would slow the ships down. And
no way.
Yeah. And
Amazing.
Whales were a hazard to shipping. There were so many of them. And in some places, like San Francisco Bay and also off the United States East Coast, the whales would be so thick that evidently they have breath that we smell is pretty bad. So it would actually stink on the shore from all the whales breathing. And that, I'm sure Europe was the same 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so it's like there was somebody wrote me from Italy who was saying that it broke her heart when she realized that the Mediterranean is not actually supposed to be rocky. It was a heavy forest. And then the trees were cut, and then the soil went away. And there was some ancient Greek philosopher who was complaining that deforestation was harming water quality. And this is 2,500 years ago. Here's one more thing, and then I'll shut up. That when people think of Iraq, as the first thing they think of cedar forest so thick the sunlight never touches the ground. And that's what Iraq was prior. The first written myth of Western culture is Gilgamesh, which is him deforesting Iraq to build a big city. So the point is, the world was once remarkably fecund everywhere, a different place.
It's incredible. But also, we are here in Sardinia, big island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. We used to have so many beautiful forests. And then the Romans came and conquered us. And they cut all the forests everything to convert the land into wheat production. We used to call Sardinia, they called il granaio di Roma, the breadbasket of Rome. So it was a completely different island. Then a little bit later, they kept cutting down forest to actually build the Italian railway system. It's incredible how much in such a short span of time, humans have changed and modified this planet. It's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, I think about a conversation I had with a friend and environmental mentor, John Osborne, when I was a young activist. We're sitting at a table eating, and he takes a paper napkin, he draws a little circle in the center, and he draws a circle around it. And he says a circle in the center is a city, and this larger area is the area from which it draws its resources. And as the city grows, it's going to denude an ever larger area. And I still talk to John. We're still very good friends. And every time we talk, I remind him of that conversation and say, basically, all of my work has been an expansion of that little diagram, because that's exactly how civilization works. And you just gave an example of it, that Rome was not able to feed the people there. They had to go somewhere else. They had to cut down the trees. They had to conquer the people. They had to do all sorts of stuff to be able to bring in the resources required by the city. That's the history of the last 5,000 years in a couple sentences. The thing that gets me about all this is that none of my analysis is all that cognitively challenging. You know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that any way of living based on the use of non-renewable resources won't last. And also any way of life that harms your land base won't last. Because if you harm it even just a little bit, and you keep harming it, eventually you're going to get down to zero. And I understand, there's this guy, Lewis Mumford, and he wrote about why have we surrendered ourselves to basically this technology, that the technologies are in charge. And why have we done that? And his answer was what he called a magnificent bribe, that basically we have exchanged everything for the fact that you and I can talk across the world, and for ice cream 24/7, and for air conditioning, and for modern medicine. And we are giving up the entire planet in exchange for that. And he wrote that back in the 1960s. And of course, it's infinitely worse now.
Do you think it's the problem of capitalism or just inherently how humans are?
Neither one.
Are we just awful?
I think
neither. Oh, okay.
So the reason I don't think it's capitalism has just accelerated it. It was happening, I mentioned before, Gilgamesh, that it's been happening for several thousand years. And on the other hand, I know that the people who lived here, where I live now, the Tolowa, they are carbon dated to at least 12,000 years ago. And when the early Europeans arrived, the place was still a paradise. There were salmon so thick in the Klamath River just south of here that the entire river was turned black with fish. And that was as late as the 1930s. And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that it's not that indigenous people are somehow magical beings. It's just that if you've been living in a place for 500 years and you're planning on living there for the next 500, you'll make different land use decisions. So that's the good news. And the bad news is that once you add consumer culture to any group, it starts to make them fall apart. And a great example of that is that there were beavers everywhere throughout much of the United States, and they are incredibly important for the health of forests and the health of streams, and they were pretty much wiped out in much of their territory for the fur trade. And the point I'm going to get at is that a lot of the beavers were killed by Indians to sell to the white people. And the reason is that the white people had metal pots, they had guns, they had steel, they had knives. And it's much easier to, I'll go a different direction for a second. There was a group of people up in the upper Mississippi Valley in the United States who lost their couple thousand year tradition of pottery making within about 20 years of metal pots being introduced. Because metal pots are lighter, they don't break, and if you can go kill 2 beaver and trade it for a metal pot, as opposed to going through all the trouble of making a pot that could at some point break, then that's really seductive. That's that same magnificent bribe. Well, there's 2 things. One is there's that, and then the other is that, remember, the city, and as the city grows, can gain a larger population by stealing all these resources and destroying the land. And that's going to give them a competitive advantage in war to the people next door. This goes way back. This is not just an American problem. This goes all the way back to the beginning. So if I destroy my land base and I plant it to wheat, and then I get a bigger crop of humans, I then have, first off, I've destroyed the land. And second, I've exceeded the carrying capacity, and then I either need to collapse or I need to expand. The advantage is if I expand, I've already got the troops and I'm an advantage of the people next door. It's like the forests of North Africa were cut down to make the Egyptian and Phoenician navies. And if you cut down your forest to make ships of war, you're going to have a better chance of conquering the others. So the good news is humans can live differently. The bad news is if they are trying to live differently and their neighbors are not, they have a real problem. Either they have to run away or be subjugated or fight back. So no, I don't think that all humans have done it. I think at this point, more or less all humans do it because we've all been subsumed into this culture. So another part of the problem is our complete disrespect and devaluing of wild nature. And this disbelief that wild nature has a subjective existence and has its own intelligence. And a couple great examples of that. If I ask you, what are the greatest pieces of art of all time? You're probably going to say Mona Lisa, Sistine Chapel, whatever, Beethoven's Ninth. What about birdsong? What about the colors at dawn? What about a redwood tree? We don't consider those pieces of art. And likewise, when we think of the greatest inventions of all time, we think of the lever, the screw, the pump, the
wheel.
The wheel. We don't think of metabolism. We don't think of proprioception, which is your ability to know where your hands are when you can't see them. We don't think of sex. And sex is a pretty great invention. And nature created it. Nature invented it. So if nature invented it, we dismiss it. And one last example of this is, I was 20 years ago, I heard an astronomer being interviewed about why we should explore Mars. And he said to answer that most important question of all, which is, are we all alone? And I was thinking, are you kidding? You're asking if we're all alone when all these wondrous
creatures,
other beings are around us? We're never alone. Yeah. So part of it is we completely disrespect wild nature. We don't have to, but we do. And it serves us because we couldn't do this to the planet if we recognized that those are all beings with lives as valuable to them as yours is to you and mine is to me.
Amen. For sure. Well, when I was working as an anthropologist in Australia with Aboriginal communities, I totally got that. How they view nature. They are animists, so they believe that anything has a soul, has a purpose in this universe. And even if you move a rock, you have to move it back where you found it because it's supposed to be there. It's really inspiring and makes you aware of your environment, of what you're surrounded by. It makes you happier as well because you're grounded. You don't think all the time a million things. You just look at the sky, hear the birds, and you're really grounded in that way. And even Aboriginal people are a great example of a civilization of thousands and thousands of years that they live in complete harmony with the environment. Also because they were kept moving all the time around because they did believe that they couldn't exploit one particular area. I really appreciated that culture so much and resonated with me so much.
Yeah, what you said about them moving around made me think that another thing that people don't talk about nearly often enough is population, and how sometimes people get upset at me because I don't provide solutions that they particularly like. And one of the reasons is that there are no solutions. If you're asking the wrong question, you won't come up with a solution that works. And people will ask, how can we support 8 billion people on the planet? And the answer is you can't. You can't do it without harming the planet. We've overshot carrying capacity. Or, likewise, they'll say, we want to keep cars. How do we keep cars? And the thing is, car culture is inherently unsustainable. And industrial culture is inherently unsustainable. I mean, all of my work is predicated on the understanding that this way of life won't last, and when it's over, I would rather there's more of the natural world left rather than less. And so the real questions are, how do we sort of manage the crash in a way that is the least destructive to wild nature? One of the reasons there aren't particularly good answers to that is because we're doing everything wrong. Instead, I mean, just to switch metaphors here, we're keeping the gas pedal to the floor as opposed to throttling back. And if I were in charge of the global economy, I would start trying to shrink it by starting with non-harmful means, things that getting rid of the worst of the luxuries. And of course, that would last about 5 minutes. Because there was a study, I saw this like 10 years ago, a study of young people in the UK. There's a couple studies. One of them was like 17 to 22 or something. And one of them was that given a choice between sunlight and access to Wi-Fi, the majority would choose access to Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi?
And the other one was a significant minority, there's not a majority, thank goodness, but a significant minority said given a choice between losing their phone or losing their finger, they would rather lose their finger.
So scary. We're so
and then
fucked.
one more is that there was, I think it's like 15% or 20% of people check their phone when they shower, and also they check their phones during sex. I don't want to get too graphic, but I got to tell you, somebody checking your phone during sex would be a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, yes, same. It's terrible. We are terrible, seriously. Oh my God, I really do wonder. Yeah, no, I don't wonder. I do believe that the world will be better off without humans, to be honest. But at the same time, you're right. You know, indigenous people had it right.
And some of them made serious mistakes. I mean, some of them entered agriculture and they destroyed their land base too. Fortunately, they weren't globally connected and they weren't able to destroy anything on the scale that we are. Well, here's one piece of good news for the planet, I think, that when this way of life collapses, there will never be another blowout like this because the easily accessible reserves of various minerals are gone. There will never be another Bronze Age because they've already got the easy access.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
And there'll never be another oil age for sure, because at first with the oil, they could just scoop it up. And there's no way that you can, the easily accessible reserves of coal are gone. So there will never be an age, not for a long time, would there be another age of tall ships, because all the big trees are gone and they're going to take thousands of years to come back.
Wow, this is so fascinating. You just blew my mind. That's really cool. Wow. Yeah, it's true. I never thought of that. That's my only consolation, to be honest. If it's really true what all our experts were saying to us in the last episodes, that we're probably not going to be around much longer, or at least a lot of us won't be, the majority. But yeah, this is the only thing, is just at least the nature will thrive in whatever form is going to be left.
Well, okay, I really get upset when people say, oh, nature's going to be fine. And the reason I get upset at that is that bodies can be fine. They can heal. So I cut my hand and 6 months later, you wouldn't even be able to see where it is. It self-heals. But that is only if you don't push it too far. It used to be thought that 1 unit of injury would cause 1 unit of harm to a forest or with pollution or something. But they've realized that's not how it works at all. That basically the forest or the river or the lake tries very hard to maintain stasis. You can do this much damage and it's fine, but it'll reach a certain tipping point at which it can no longer support itself. And bodies are the same way. You know, a little bit of damage, and then at some point you die. And so that's the bad news.
It's like rubber band, right? When you stretch it too much, it's gonna...
That's a great example. So the good news, though, is that the either worst or second worst nuclear disaster in world history or in industrial history was Chernobyl. And the wolves are back. And the beavers are back. And life really wants to live. And that says a couple things to me. One is that if you just stop killing things will come back. And the second thing it says to me is that the everyday workings of agriculture are more harmful to the planet than a nuclear disaster, because the area around Chernobyl is, in terms of wildlife, is much healthier now. I mean, yeah, they've got radiation. That's bad, but they're there. And then the other thing that has to do with this is there are more than 450 dead zones in the ocean, and there's one of them I know of that's recovered. It's in the Black Sea. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was no longer economically feasible to do agriculture right next to the shore. So the runoff stopped, and it only took 25 years for the fish to come back enough that they could do a commercial fishery. I'm not excited about the commercial fishery, but it means the fish are back.
Yeah.
If humans were to disappear tomorrow, salmon would be, I think, perfectly fine. But give them another 10 or 15 years, and they might be pushed past any sort of recovery point. In terms of what I think we should do, is one of the most important things. It's like my friend John Osborne says, that as things become increasingly chaotic, he wants to make sure some doors remain open. And what he means by that is to say, if bull trout are still here in 10 years, they may be here in 100, but if they're gone in 10, they're gone forever. So I think it's incredibly important for us to protect as many wild places as we can, just in the hope that after this all comes down, whatever that looks like, there are more places from which wild nature can rejuvenate.
So what is the timeline, do you think? How many years do we have? Because we heard some really, really terrible, terrible news from some of our guests. So I'm very curious your take.
I mean, it really should have collapsed a long time ago, but they keep figuring out ways to prop up its corpse. And I don't know. And also another question is, what does this process look like?
Yeah, that was the other question as well.
I don't know what things are like there, but where I live, basically most of the small businesses are gone. And I don't know how much of that is just the concentration by Walmart. And the economy is in shambles here. I don't know, again, how it is there, but inflation's really out of control. And those are all, I think, predictable signs of the end of empire. And also, we don't really have time to go into this very much, but both the right and left are going completely insane in ways that I think are predictable based on the collapse of economic systems. I think of this line I read years ago. A Brazilian dictator said this in the 60s. He said, "How is the economy doing? The economy is doing very well. The people, not so well." And that's pretty much what's going on, at least, again, I don't know Europe, but that's what's going on in the United States, is the economy is doing okay, and the people are not.
Yeah. No, we're definitely not as bad as America, that's for sure. We're all watching it crumble. It's really sad because I love the States. But the thing is, here it's turning that way slowly, unfortunately. But that is also the influence of America. You guys tend to influence a lot world economy and politics, as we're seeing.
And I think it's really important when we think about collapsing economies, it's really important to look at this also from the perspective of non-humans. And I think from the perspective of coho salmon, I mean, they can't wait for the economy to collapse. I think about this as if space aliens came down from outer space and they were doing to the planet what this culture is doing to the planet, vacuuming the oceans and putting dioxin in every mother's breast milk, and they were, doing open air experiments with endocrine disruptors, I think we would resist. But because we're on the inside of it, we get all confused. And it helps me at least to step outside my own perspective to the perspective of the salmon or the lampreys or the bears or anybody else. I mean, it's not benefiting them. And I think every species on Earth, except for the humans who benefit from it, are just holding their breaths and praying for the day it all comes down. But what is it going to look like when it comes down? I don't know. I mean, one of my fears as it comes down is that as the wars for resources become ever more necessary for the system to continue, that at some point people will just decide to nuke it all. Worst case scenario.
Wow. Derrick, that's dark.
Second worst case scenario is for this just to continue to grind away at it. But let's say that doesn't happen. What's it going to look like? The best case scenario would be that the bureaucracies just start to crumble such that they can't even deliver the mail anymore. And so here's something I want to say, is that I started really paying attention to COVID, which is that I started paying attention to it when about a week or two after they shut down Wuhan, a Hyundai factory in Korea shut down. And it struck me as, and it's just extraordinary that how interconnected the global economy is and how vulnerable it is. So one of the lessons I wish we would have learned from the shutdown is how incredibly ridiculous it is to have a global economy for which you depend on your necessities. And so I would give people two pieces of advice as things collapse. One of them is, or I'd make two pleas. One of them is protect every scrap of wild nature you can. And the other is relocalize food systems. Because if a food system can be interdicted by, or if any global transportation system can be interdicted by a virus or by a response to a virus, it can also be interdicted by a war. It can be interdicted by an earthquake. So you don't want to be reliant, which takes us back to the beginning of the conversation with Rome being reliant on the breadbasket there, that there are inherent weaknesses in that. And I think so, again, protect wild nature and relocalize food systems.
Be ready. Few people mention that actually. But how can people do that in cities? Because I love cities. I grew up in cities, but because of the whole thing that I think is going to happen, we moved to the country. And here in Sardinia is great because we all exchange different sorts of foods. The wine, the Cannonau wine is very good. The one that makes you live 100 years. I guess not in the future anymore, but, pigs on a spit and all these kind of things. So that's fantastic. But for our listeners that are living in the city and they can't leave them, how can they be ready in cities? It's a tough one.
It's a good question.
Get the hell out of the cities.
Well, that's one of the answers, but of that capacity for one reason or another. You got a job and you got two kids and you're raising them by yourself. What are you going to do? But, I have a couple of diseases for which I am reliant upon high-tech medicines to survive. And when the medical system's down, I'm dead. And I'm going to die sometime. And I'm not being flip about that. I'm a big believer in keep one's options as open as possible. And so my approach to it, no matter where I live, would be to try to be as adaptable.
That's a good answer.
I remember 20 years ago, I had a few young kids come up to me at talks, like 18 years old, and say, I think society is going to collapse in the next couple of years, so I don't want to go to college. And I said, I don't think you should make your determination of whether you should go to college based on some socioeconomic thing that might or might not happen. So if you want to go to college, then do. See, I'm an environmentalist because in part I'm pretty conservative. By which I mean, I don't mean socially conservative necessarily. What I mean is, I think it's a really stupid idea to wipe out the salmon you might need to eat tomorrow. And yes, salmon exist for their own sake and they have their own lives. Fully believe all that. But at the same time, I just think it's stupid to do open air experiments with endocrine disruptors or with neurotoxins or whatever. I think it's remarkably stupid.
Very stupid.
My first degree was in physics, and my junior year I wanted to quit. And my mom gave me the best advice ever, which is, would you rather go the rest of your life saying you have 3 years toward a degree in physics or go the rest of your life saying you have a degree in physics? And after college, I made some incredibly courageous and dangerous career choices, becoming a writer. And that was made so much easier because at any moment, I knew I could go get a job for an engineering firm. So in the city, and you have to stay in a city, at least do things that will make it so your survival or your behavior can be as flexible as possible. Or think about this too, that what do we say to a woman who is in a situation with a batterer who doesn't have the financial means to get away at that moment and doesn't have the friends or doesn't have the support network? Usually the advice is, well, start building up a nest egg if you can. Start building up a go bag. And then when you're ready, you can make the break. And maybe we say the same thing about cities. Because the problem, as Daniel Quinn said, is that we are dependent for our very lives on the system that's killing the planet. And that's nowhere more true than in a city. You're absolutely dependent upon this whole system. I mean, I guess if I was in a city and I couldn't move and I couldn't get out, I would do is I would begin to cultivate friendship with people who were not in the city. So at the very least, when it's time for me to flee, I've got someplace to go.
Yeah. Form a community somehow, even if it's a little bit far away, but at least you have somewhere in case shit hit the fan, basically.
And also, the first thing about being in the city is to recognize what's going on and to recognize there's nothing you can do. There's a line I wrote in one of my books, and I got this from reading histories of World War II Germany, that those just blew me away, that there was a Jewish symphony that was continuing to play their symphony as they tried to pretend that they couldn't smell the smoke from the synagogue burning next door. And we have a tremendous capacity for denial.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think the first thing is to recognize that as the economy goes down, cities will be less and less viable. And same thing as Alcoholics Anonymous, recognize there's a problem. Because we are addicted to the technology, and we're addicted to this way of life.
We're addicted to overconsumption.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about getting bank loans?
Well, what happens if nothing collapses then? You're stuck with a huge debt.
I know we fucked. True.
If we knew, if we crystal ball that wasn't cloudy and we could look into the future and say, the entire banking system's going to collapse in 4 weeks, then yeah, of course run up your credit cards. But that's also a really good way to put yourself in debt if your prediction doesn't come true.
I wanted to ask you, how can we convince the rest of the world that we need to change now, not tomorrow, well, yesterday, really? How can we do that? Because I saw that you also say it's okay even to get to a violent place as long as we change things, because things have to change.
I don't know how, if there was a magic technique to actually get people to value wild nature over the economic system, I would have pushed the button to make it happen, or I would have cast the spell. And what I do know is that a lot of people are really unhappy with various parts of the system. When I talk to different people, I emphasize different things. So, for example, years ago, when the Walmart moved to town, there was a guy who ran a little computer shop, and I would never talk to him about salmon because he didn't care about salmon. But I would talk to him about the effects of big box stores on local businesses. And he was driven out of business by Walmart, and he hated the big corporations.
Yeah, it's really sad.
We can try to meet people where they are on some of these issues and just sort of push them a little bit. There used to be this big movement among environmentalists back in the 90s that if we can just get CEOs to go out into the forest for, a week, they will fall in love with nature. And it's just nonsense. I've lived in the rural West most of my life, and I have been friends with loggers and ranchers who have spent far more time outside than I ever did, and they hated nature. And they knew nature much better than I. But, they cut down trees, they kill every coyote they see. I don't think that simply being in nature is going to do it. I think that being out of nature does tremendous harm. But I don't think that being in nature by itself, especially when you have economic reasons to hate nature, it's okay to cut down all the trees because they're making a bunch of money, is that people don't change their minds overnight. So I don't actually argue with people. I read this back in my 20s that somebody said it takes 10 years to change your mind. And I know that's true of usually a couple years, because a friend, this happens all the time, a friend will make some argument to me. And I'm like, nah, that doesn't make any sense. And I disagree with them at the time. And then what will happen is a year or two later, I go up to that same friend, and with no self-awareness whatsoever, I say, I had this great idea. And then I say the same thing to them that they told me a year or two ago. And I think that's how we actually change our minds. So I don't argue with people. What I do, I plant seeds, and then people might disagree vehemently. That's fine. And then they go away, and maybe the seed sprouts and maybe it doesn't. So this too, for what it's worth, is that evidence doesn't usually convince people. What we can do is we can create circumstances where at some point in the future, something may happen that will then trigger something to get it. And again, that's usually how I learn. Somebody will plant a seed, I don't see it, don't see it, and all of a sudden something will happen. And then you change your perspective. I can't imagine anybody thinking, and obviously they do, but I can't imagine how anybody can think that non-humans aren't sentient. I see decision-making processes among every species that I pay attention to. I saw honeybees. It's very interesting. Honeybees can tell time because they go to certain flowers at certain times of day because that's when the flower produces nectar. And they did a study where they put honey or sugar water on a table, and they put it here one day, and then here the next day, and here the day after at a certain time. And after a few times, the bees noticed the pattern, and they were waiting at the next place.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And people can just laugh at this, but how do you get people to recognize that? I guess I'll say one thing about that, which is people used to ask me all the time, So how do we have interspecies communications? And I said, if you have dogs or cats, you have them all the time, because if the dog's water dish is empty, how does the dog let you know? It looks at the water dish, looks at you, looks at the water dish, looks at you. Just because it can't speak English doesn't mean it's not communicating. These communications going on all the time.
Yeah. Another thing, actually, your position on gender, patriarchy against matriarchy. Because here in Sardinia, for example, we come from a matriarchal society, which is incredibly fascinating. Sardinian energy and culture, it's very impregnated with female energy. Because I've seen, I think yesterday, a drawing of the patriarchal society is actually a triangle, where a matriarchal society is more of a circle. The circular economy, it's not pyramidal, like we are at the top of the pyramid, men, humans. What do you think of that? Is it better if maybe women would be in charge at this point? Because guys, you fucked it, I'm sorry, but we gave you the chance and it went pear-shaped.
I don't think that putting women into positions of power within this fundamental system would make it tangible. We would still have the same mega machine sort of pushing everything forward. And you can have a woman in charge of Microsoft, and it's still Microsoft.
Yeah, it's too late. I would be talking to you for hours. Unfortunately, we have to close, but Derrick, thank you so much. It's been an honor having you with us, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Well, it's been fun, and let's do it again.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap for another mind-blowing episode of Are We Fucked? How to Survive a Climate Shit Show. I'm your host, Lisa Camillo, anthropologist, filmmaker, and your guide through the wilderness of critical ideas. A huge thank you to our incredible guest today, Derrick Jensen, for challenging our perspectives and inspiring us to take action. If you're hungry for more revolutionary ideas, be sure to check out Derrick's website at derrickjensen.org. There, you'll find a treasure trove of articles, books, and resources to fuel your activism. And hey, before we sign off, I want to remind you that Are We Fucked is a production of Against the Tide Films. For more information about our podcast and upcoming episodes, visit us at againstthetidefilms.com. Don't forget to tune in every Wednesday for a new episode, available wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate us, and share the love with your friends and family. And hey, why not set up a reminder to tune in every week on Spotify? Thank you for tuning in, Climate Warriors. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep fighting the good fight. I am Lisa Camillo signing off. Take care and remember, the future is ours to shape.